All right. So now having understood this larger story arc that we are going to follow from the RBI's vantage point, let us look at the fluctuations in a little bit more detail. We have seen them earlier at several instances when we plotted both GDP and inflation, and particularly when we did the apples and oranges exercise, we went into discussing about how does one arrive at the notion of price growth between 2 years. That is when we said that there is a fixed quantity of apples and oranges that we could possibly take, either fix it in 2024 or 2025 and evaluate the price story from there on. But let's first take a step back and define inflation clearly. Inflation is the rate at which the prices of different products and services rise in the economy. Okay, it's a rate of price growth. And it is a sort of a sustained increase in the general price level of different goods and services in an economy over a period of time. We have already seen that it is measured by tracking the basket of products and services. These baskets are great if they are representative of households and different businesses, and we track the price of this basket month to month or year to year. Now, there are two popular ways that statisticians use in order to measure these or in order to arrive at these two baskets. If you really look into the whole economy, that is just one supply chain, right? Starts from raw material and ultimately ends on our plate at the consumer's end. You can measure prices at different points on this particular supply chain. If you talk about the two extremes, where the production is happening, that is where the wholesale products are being purchased, the raw materials, etc. If you measure the prices there and you fix a basket there and you track the price of that basket over time, that will give you a different price index called as wholesale price index. If you were to track the basket on the consumption side, and if you were to track the basket of production services that people consume finally when things have been produced in their final form or shape, that is when you will get a different price index, and it is known as the consumer price index because you have a basket that will involve what typical consumers consume: food, fuel, housing, transport, education, health, entertainment, etc. It reflects what consumers actually pay in our daily lives. These two price indices can also diverge. You shouldn't be surprised. You have already seen a statistical exercise which, in just a very simple setup of apples and oranges, gave us two different answers. In this case, the reasons could be actually far more nuanced. On the wholesale side, for example, if the oil price go up, then the procurement of oil and other raw materials will spike up immediately. But on the consumption side, it would still take some time to travel all the way through the supply chain. The markups will not be immediate. It will take some time to respond because this change has only happened on this end. So the CPI, what I'm measuring here on this end, may not be entirely aligned to the WPI that I might be measuring on this particular end. This divergence may happen, and it is quite often the case with India also. WPI and CPI, sometimes they are in convergence, they move together, but sometimes they are in divergence. The consumer price index, which is essentially a basket of goods and services, is also called as the headline CPI, because that is the number that is tracked most by the media, etc. But because food and fuel are the main components of that CPI basket, there is an argument that there is a lot of noise that we are also capturing in this CPI basket. Because, for example, there is usually a seasonality every year. Monsoons are either great or monsoons are terribly bad, and these may translate into higher or lower food prices, which are there temporarily, but ultimately things ease out. So the headline inflation is given to be a little bit more noisy and volatile. It can jump up or down, even if when things within the broader economy are largely stable. A bad monsoon for 2 or 3 months may just spike up tomatoes and onions prices and may drive up the headline inflation, even though everything else would largely be still in good order. Similarly, global prices can go up. There's a Russia-Ukraine war, oil prices go up, which can make the headline inflation jump up or down. So economists sometimes also look at another subset of this headline inflation, which is called as core inflation. That is basically CPI minus the food and fuel. And the intuition really is that it is a number that tracks the more persistent, the more the sticky inflation, that inflation which is not really given to a lot of volatile up and down movement. Core inflation is used as a diagnostic instrument. So if the core inflation is really moving in an adverse direction, then it tells you that something deep is really moving in the wrong direction with the economy. But the headline inflation is used primarily because that is where public is generally forming the expectations about inflation, because the public is most affected by petrol and by tomatoes. So CPI, headline CPI, is used as an anchor, is basically anchor, because that is a number that the policymaker should be most aware about. However, the core inflation is what is also used in parallel as a diagnostic instrument. RBI reports these inflation numbers. It also targets what is called as under inflation targeting policy, the CPI inflation. We'll talk about inflation targeting in just a bit.